Ako si JD. I'm an adoptee born in the Philippines and raised in the US. I was born in the hospital, and 2 days later, my mother left me in the hospital, and I was subsequently sent to an orphanage, Cribs Receiving Home in Sampaloc. And I was taken care of in the orphanage for a couple months, and then I was um, adopted by a military family, an American father and a Filipina wife. And I grew up in the United States after we left the Philippines. And I was really young when I was adopted, so I personally don't have any direct memories that I have of my adoption or of those days. My adoptive family consisted very small unit, my Italian American father and my Filipino mother, both having pretty big families, but because we were in the military, it was just our little unit of the parents and their biological son. I was fortunate to have Filipino influences all through my life. I had a Filipino mother, and she had extensive family still in the Philippines, and she had brought her nanay to the US to help raise her son and myself while she was working. So I got to have a Lola who spoke only in Tagalog, and one of my favorite pastimes was when my Lola would be cooking in the kitchen and my mother would be there, and they would really do the real cuento cuento, the chismes, about olden days of how family used to do things and where are they at now. And I remember thinking that that was a huge part of what I wanted to experience, and that made me want to go back to the Philippines. I've had that opportunity to go back several times when I was younger and experience the Philippines, the joys, the beaches and the fun of it. So, yeah, very wonderful memories of going back to the Philippines. I felt ostracized a lot from my small family structure, and it was very apparent. I was in a very abusive environment, a lot of physical violence, a lot of emotional restriction. Two emotions that I understood very well was anger and sadness. And a lot of times I was held apart um, from the from the unit. I didn't always eat with the family when I was younger, um, and there was just daily things that were said that made me understand that I had a very outsider viewpoint. And I was too young to really understand. And this led to me having to achieve or try to earn my way into this family. Although I wasn't told of my adoption, and I think that this led to a very confused childhood of just not understanding why, what did I do or what did I not do to be able to be included. Um, this led to a survival mentality of, well, you have to operate like this, and you have to control, limit, restrict your emotions. And this was debilitating up until I was a teenager, where I realized this wasn't normal and healthy. At the age of 19, I found out that I was adopted, primarily because I needed to look at some documentation, and I was told that this may not have ever been told to me if it was their choice. But I was going to look at the documentation, and it would have revealed that I was adopted. This had an everlasting effect on me, and it helped me to really change my perspective and thinking from my childhood. So it changed from a viewpoint of, why me? Why was I experiencing and going through all of those hardships, and why was I singled out and isolated and left out? This one word, adoption, became the answer to everything. Um, why was I not part of the family unit? Why was I not part of the family structure? Why me? I mean, just that one word, adopted. It, in a sense, gave me a lot of healing, because it answered that I am not one of them. And while I might not agree with the sentiments that I don't belong to that structure, it became reality for me that I was the outsider. And it gave me such a set of relief. Um, I think I did have questions about my birth family, to a degree, small, but never did I really think that they're letting me go, relinquishing me, was more of an issue that I needed an answer to, versus the experience that I had from my adoption family. I thought a lot about the practices and the processes in order to relinquish the child, and also, what is the process to find families? That was the first thing that kind of popped out of my head. Like, it, as an adoptee, are there resources for me? Are there other people out there just like me? Uh, why is this made so easy for families that they can receive a child, but yet there's no continuous checking in on the child to make sure that it is a great fit and a great environment, and not just for the first year or the 2 years. um, and I really thought about the community. Am I the only one who is adopted? At 19, I really went to the internet and I did research, and luckily I was able to find FAN, Filipino Adoptees Network, that was able to at least have some conversations around the context of adoption. And that was the very few resources that I found that were pertainable to me. Uh, I didn't necessarily think that it was important to look at adoption from a general perspective. I was really looking for only Filipino resources, and they were pretty limited. Um, Another struggle that I know I had personally was hearing the different stories of my birth family, and a lot of them may not have had any depth to them, any maybe truths that I could actually track down. After I was told of my adoption, it was kind of swept under the rug and never really talked about again. And it was pretty hush hush amongst the family. Nobody talked to me about it. It was like, wow, I learned something so important about my beginning of my life and something that I think is important that answers a lot of questions, to my adoptive family issues, but nobody still would talk about it. It just disappeared all of a sudden. And I always wondered why, when I brought it up, how come it still was taboo to talk about. It also isn't something that I know family members outside of our little unit, they all knew of my adoption, but yet there was no mentors within any part of the community that came and said, hey, let's talk about it, or hey, there's some resources for you, or there's a couple of other folks maybe you should talk to. It just really is a piece that still is hidden. I often say I am a proud Filipina. Although I grew up in US America, and when I'm traveling abroad, people will ask, where did you grow up? I will say, yes, I grew up in the US, but I always identify first being born as a strong Filipina. Going through a very tough childhood, I also identify as being a survivor of domestic violence. And with that, I believe that creates a strong and perseverance attitude in life. As an adoptee, it's usually not one that I bring up often, but not because I don't like to tell folks of being my experience with adoption. It's usually that I only use it when I'm around other adoptees. I will say, yes, I'm part of the adoptee experience. But for the most part, I still identify as my adoptive family as my family. As an adult adoptee, I am able to see a lot of different various viewpoints now. I think there's great experiences with adoption stories. Unfortunately, I did not have the more positive experience. What I think how it's impacted me, that's changed my viewpoint, is that there's a lot of understanding that goes into both sides. And it's not only from my adoptee point of view, but then there is all sides of the triad. So there's the birth family, there is the adoptee, and then there is the adoption family. And each part of that triad circle has a need for resources, outlets, and even an ability to work through the process. It's the same as having a biological child, but there might be more assistance required when working with families that have been separated. There's a lot of research that goes into how much trauma has occurred to a very young infant and how they can still retain um, the trauma being relinquished by their parents. There's also a really big part of as you get older, we still experience the PTSD, and there's probably some experiences that we go through that are directly in correlation to our adoption. So ultimately, there's not only from an adoptee perspective, you have a lot of understanding that has to happen on maybe why were we given up, and also, right, there is all different shackles as adults we have to let go of. And some folks didn't have a great ability to do that. So, if anything, becoming older and a little wiser, hopefully, it's just understanding that in order to break our cycles, it's a very hard thing to do, and it's continuous work on therapy, self reflection, and really trying to help frame our hearts and our mindsets on a continual basis. Adoption really had an impact on my life once I had an understanding. It's something where I think that adoption is swept underneath the rug in our Filipino communities. It's one of those that doesn't get talked about. We talk a lot about food, we talk a lot about how to cook food and lumpia and a lot of different Filipino traits, but I've not heard a lot about adoption and support of babies that were adopted, children that were adopted abroad. And it would be an amazing opportunity for local chapters of Filipino communities to be able to have a support system through this that could be offered to families, adult adoptees, and even the community on ways that could be supportive towards the development and the therapies of folks going through this process. A lot of times we don't have a public foray that discusses these. And how is it that we want to, as a community, show compassion and collaboration? This is something that I think is important and we should be able to give. And especially if it's a continuing practice where adoptees are being able to partner and secure homes in the US with families abroad. This is important. One, we could offer mentorship for children and also for adult adoptees, supportive groups to be able to talk and discuss. Um, Second is there's a lot of mental health issues that happen in our space of adoption. One, because we aren't talking about this, we aren't able to express the emotions that we're feeling or the lack of unity that we're supposed to be feeling. And I feel like this is something that we can partnership along the way. I also believe that this is going on with Bakit Cuento Cuento. Why for the Cuento Cuento project? Well, when I was doing the ICAP presentation along with Amy, we felt absolutely inspired afterwards. And we really wanted to start a movement, a collective energy that was able to showcase other Filipino experiences in this adoption space. I'm really honored to serve along with the other speakers and hear their journeys and their viewpoints on how they were able to deal with the various parts, very tough journey of adoption. So please join me in watching for the rest of this series, Ako Si, through December. Thank you.